We are back on Morning Line. Thanks for joining us. Our guest, Professor John Weil from MTSU. We're talking this morning about the January 6th hearings, 2 of them in the books, with 3 or 4 more to go, with another tomorrow morning beginning at 9 o'clock. Professor, big picture here as we move forward. Ultimately, when these all wrap up, what is the purpose? What is this going to mean? I mean, assuming that in the remaining ones, there's no big bombshell. A lot of it maybe more detail, more, scrutiny to what happened, but maybe nothing really new that we didn't have a handle on. What is the purpose beyond this, you believe, aside from what you said earlier, which I know is, can we come up with some things out of this that maybe prevent it from happening again? The peaceful transfer of power, which to me is what a lot of this is really all about, or should be about, okay?
Yeah, I mean, there is a possibility, of course, that indictments would ultimately come out from this. If it would not be likely as a result of the committee action itself so much as, giving the go-ahead or bringing information to Merrick Garland and others who might be able to bring prosecution. So the primary purpose of congressional hearings is generally legislative. Certainly there's a purpose in informing. I guess one of the most troubling things to me about, what has happened is, okay, in some ways it's water under the bridge, but we got a lot of candidates out there who are still embracing the argument that Trump is the legitimate president, that Trump won. And if you get too many of these happening, you just wonder, this precedent that we set back in 1801. It was the first time, to my knowledge, in world history that you had a peaceful transition of power from one political party to another. And, one of the ironies yesterday, I was reading about, John Eastman, who was the author of this, memo saying that Pence should be able to reverse the election. But he openly acknowledged that if it were a Democratic vice president, if it were Al Gore counting in 2001, that he didn't think Gore should have had the ability to declare himself the president rather than George Bush.
Mm-hmm. Right. So politics, I guess then you're right. There are candidates out there that still, one, are seeking the former president's endorsement, and are still of the belief that he won, which is flat wrong, period, end of story, though they still go that way. So do you think there's any chance, aside from maybe indictments come out of this, that folks watching this, maybe not the hardcore ones that are just big-time MAGA supporters, but the ones who maybe, weren't sure, is this going to change anyone's mind as they lay it out again and you see what literally played out, and at least get folks that maybe didn't for a while acknowledge, okay, well, at least we can acknowledge that, he did not win?
Yeah, it seems unlikely that there will be the so-called smoking gun. That in Watergate, I guess the smoking gun was, finding out that there were all these tapes and that you could verify that what John Dean was saying was true and what Richard Nixon was saying basically was not true. I don't think we're going to have a moment like that. I don't expect a big sea change, that all of a sudden people will say, hey, we were wrong or whatever. But, think of how many elections are won, by 1% or less of the vote, the margin, and how many states in the Electoral College. So you don't have to convince everybody. But I think it is important for, whatever your view of the election, I think it's important to look at the evidence and try to, as much as you can, to independently, decide what you think about it.
Right. And I, again, wonder if in this day and age, it's to the point now where no matter how overwhelming it is, and during these hearings, we're hearing from Republicans who are in his circle laying it out there that he didn't win. And yet there's still people that are not going to buy into that. And I'm not saying this like saying, well, okay, you should have your mind changed and you vote Democrat. I'm saying, too, among Republicans out there, they could be seeing this and say, you know what, I hear this, and I'm tired of these Republican candidates that are still, spouting these untruths. I'm going to vote for the Republican challenger that's not. I'm wondering, and we know there's a large core of the more conventional Republicans out there, the Bush family and others, who are not fans of Trump, and there are a lot of other Republicans that Republican voters could turn toward, as opposed to those who are getting a Donald Trump endorsement, or as opposed to those who are saying still those election results were wrong and what happened on January 6th was a good thing. I mean, right? I mean, it's not just about, well, this is good, go vote Democrat. Well, it's like they should maybe have their minds changed to the point where they say, I'm going to vote for these Republicans here who are telling me the truth.
Again, one of the ironies of, reading through, which I did this morning, the 12-page statement that Trump put out yesterday, is he's accusing his opponents of, ignoring inflation, ignoring, all the current immigration, all the current problems, and looking to the past. But the person clinging most strongly to the past is Donald Trump, who still can't get over the fact, and I mean, if you look at it, Hillary Clinton had a much better case in 2016, and she didn't win the election, but she at least won the popular vote. Trump won neither the popular vote nor the electoral college vote.
Right. And so, yeah, because the point you make is a good one. As far as Democrats or Joe Biden is concerned, he's got 2 more years till he faces a re-election. And yeah, things aren't great right now, that's for sure. And whether or not you want to say, and I've said all along, whether it's him, President Trump, President Obama, President Bush, these types of gas prices are not the president's fault. But everyone's like, it drives me crazy. I've seen lately, I go up to a gas pump and there's a sticker on there. And I've seen these with other candidates in the past, says, I did this. And it's a picture of Biden pointing it out. It's ridiculous, okay? And it's the same way if you did that. I've seen stickers in the past like that with Donald Trump with things,
Right.
People, it's not fair to blame them. But I mean, I think any president is going to take some heat, especially with inflation and the economy. Not so much that it's his fault necessarily it's happened, but it's not like, all right, you're in charge. What are you going to do about it? So, I mean, they've got some real issues here for sure. But, I mean, it's President Trump that's still clinging to the past, insisting now. It'd be one thing if he came forward and said, all right, it's been 2 years and I've decided I lost. All right, let's just move on. He ain't doing that. He's not doing it. And he never will.
No, it doesn't seem like
Does some of this happening now? I mean, we still don't know what his plans are for 2 years from now. I mean, do you believe that? I mean, because I think one thing about this is the president, no doubt, former president, would love to be president again. I don't think he could stomach running again and losing again. And so I don't know. I'm wondering in his head, he could just throw his name into the hat. But I don't think he wants to do that if he thinks he's got a pretty darn good chance of, 1, maybe not even getting the nomination, or 2, losing again. Then he'll be a 2-time loser in his own mind.
Right.
So I wonder if that's one of the things that, I mean, do you think he'll run again? Do these hearings have any bearing maybe on that decision-making process?
Yes, and so do a lot of external factors. Both Biden and Trump are at an age, where people can be very productive, but also are much, more likely to have health problems. And so in some ways, both are a bit chancy. And, there has been some discussion as to whether Biden will run again. I certainly don't know. The one advantage is that if he runs, the party's less likely to be, divided. Think of how many candidates there were that Trump emerged from.
Yes.
And you think of that many Democrats all putting their names in the hat. And I will say it looks like, Pence and DeSantis and Hutchison and, a good number of Republicans looks to me like they're positioning themselves to run. And I don't know if that's if Trump falters or they're going to put their names in and see what happens. And, maybe people, you can be a Trump, you can favor some of Trump's policies, for example, immigration or that kind of thing, without necessarily, thinking that Trump is the best messenger, just as you could favor Democratic policies and believe there might be someone, a bit more dynamic or whatever than Biden is.
Right. So the thinking is, you just named a bunch of the Republicans that would jump into the fray potentially then. I think they're gearing up, and I think there's several that will go in and seek the nomination, whether former President Trump enters it or not. I don't think if he decides to enter, a bunch of them are just going to fall back and say, no, it's yours. I don't see that happening. And then it'll be interesting where you see someone like, can you imagine if that happens and DeSantis jumps in, who I think fancies himself something of a President Trump clone, which again,
Yes.
I've said this time and again, Donald Trump, in my opinion, is unto himself. There is nothing else and no one else like him, primarily because of his background. And I don't put any, I don't try to underestimate the value of what he gained by for years hosting The Apprentice. Believe it or not, we're in a media world, and what he did with that show, which was quite entertaining, that's huge. And there aren't other candidates that have that. That has been a huge boon to him. Without that show, he doesn't become president, in my opinion.
Be interesting if Dr. Oz ended up running against him.
How about that?
Have two television personalities going head to head.
Well, we'll see how that plays out. It's very interesting. We'll take a break, come back, take a few more phone calls, continue our conversation with Professor Weil right after this.